I woke up in a cold sweat, the remnants of the nightmare still clinging to me like a heavy fog. The screams echoed in my ears, piercing through the veil of sleep, and the horrific images of the plane crash flooded my mind. I could still see the fire, the twisted metal, and the faces of those trapped inside, their desperate cries haunting me even in the waking world. The morning light filtered through the curtains, but it felt more like a spotlight exposing my deepest fears. "Damn it," I muttered to myself, rubbing my temples as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I could feel my heart racing, a relentless drumbeat that refused to subside. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was only 6 in the morning. The day stretched before me, endless and daunting, but I had to shake this off. I needed to focus. I trudged into the kitchen, the dull ache of anxiety gnawing at my insides. The smell of burnt coffee filled the air, a strange comfort amidst the chaos of my thoughts. I poured a cup, the bitter liquid grounding me, even if only for a moment. As I stared out the window at the world outside, I wondered how anyone could go about their day as if everything was normal. How could they not see the shadows lurking just beneath the surface? Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my laptop and settled at the dining table, determined to immerse myself in work. I had deadlines to meet, reports to write, anything to distract me from the horror that lingered in my mind. But as I scrolled through emails, the gnawing panic resurfaced, clawing at my chest. My thoughts were consumed by the crash, by the lives lost, and the unanswered questions that swirled around it like a tempest. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. It was a news alert. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the notification. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to shield myself from the inevitable reminders of that horrific day. But curiosity won out, and I opened the article. "Anniversary of the tragic Flight 237 crash," the headline blared. My heart sank. I felt the world around me fade away as I read the words, my mind racing with the memories of that day. The article detailed the events leading up to the crash, the aftermath, and the ongoing investigation into the airline. I could feel my palms sweating, the familiar grip of panic tightening around my throat. "Why can't it just be over?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I needed air. I needed to escape this suffocating reality. I stood abruptly, nearly knocking over my coffee cup, and rushed out the door. The fresh air hit me like a wave, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm within. The street was quiet, the early morning sun casting a warm glow over everything. I walked aimlessly, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quite grasp. The voices of the survivors echoed in my head, their stories intertwining with my own. "Lucas!" a voice called out. I turned to see my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, watering her plants. She looked up at me with concern etched on her face. "Are you all right?" I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Yeah, just a rough night." She nodded knowingly, perhaps having heard the whispers about me. "Take care of yourself, dear. You know where to find me if you need to talk." "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I walked on, grateful for her concern but feeling more isolated than ever. As I wandered, my thoughts returned to my mother. The memories of her flooded my mind, a bittersweet ache in my chest. I could still remember how she used to hold me close when nightmares plagued my sleep, whispering reassurances until I drifted off again. But now, she was gone, and I was left to navigate this darkness alone. Returning home, I decided to rummage through some of her old belongings. I hadn't done so in years, but something compelled me to search. I found a dusty box tucked away in the corner of my closet, filled with forgotten mementos. As I opened it, the scent of aged paper and faded perfume enveloped me, sending a wave of nostalgia crashing over me. I sifted through the contents. Old photographs, letters, and trinkets from a life I barely remembered. My heart raced as my fingers brushed against a familiar object, a small cassette tape. It was a recording of my mother's voice, something I hadn't heard in ages. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the play button. Would it bring comfort or pain? "Just do it," I whispered to myself, my curiosity overpowering my hesitation. I pressed play, and her voice filled the room, soft and melodic. "Lucas, if you're listening to this, it means I'm no longer with you. I want you to know that there are things I never told you." Her voice trailed off, and my heart sank. What could she have been hiding? As she continued speaking, she mentioned her investigations, her obsession with uncovering the truth behind the crash. "There's a truth hidden in plain sight," she said, her tone serious. "I need you to promise me you'll look for it. Don't let them silence you." The words sent chills down my spine. Why hadn't I paid more attention to her warnings? What had she discovered? I felt a surge of determination wash over me, pushing aside the shadows that had haunted me for so long. I needed to know more. I spent the rest of the day combing through the box, uncovering letters that detailed her findings, her frustrations with the airline, and her fears of what might happen if she pressed too hard. A letter caught my eye, the ink slightly smudged as if she had written it in haste. "Lucas," it began, "I can't shake this feeling that there's more to the story. I've come across information that could change everything, but I fear for our safety. I've arranged to meet with someone who might help, but I'm scared." My heart raced. This was it. This was the lead I needed. She had been onto something, and now I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. That night, I lay in bed, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was the person she mentioned? What had she discovered? And why did it feel like I was being pulled into a web of secrets that had remained hidden for far too long? As I drifted into a restless sleep, the images of the crash returned, sharper and more vivid than before. I was back there, witnessing the chaos and destruction. The cries of the passengers echoed in my ears, drowning out everything else. I jolted awake, my heart pounding, the weight of the world pressing down on me. I needed answers. I couldn't let my mother's work go unfinished. I had to find out what had happened and why the truth had been buried. The visions, the nightmares, they were my calling, a dark invitation to uncover the secrets that had haunted my family for years. With a newfound resolve, I promised myself that I would not rest until I unraveled the mystery surrounding the crash. It was time to confront the shadows that loomed over my life and discover the truth that lay hidden within them. I woke up in a cold sweat, the remnants of my nightmare clinging to me like a shroud. The screams echoed in my ears, a cacophony of horror that I couldn't shake off. I had seen the airplane engulfed in flames, plummeting toward the ground, and in that moment, I felt a sharp pang in my chest, a deep, gut-wrenching sense of loss. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. The morning light filtered through the curtains, but it did little to brighten the darkness looming over me. I got out of bed and stumbled into the kitchen, hoping a cup of coffee would drown out the memories of the crash. The news had covered the anniversary of the accident extensively, and I knew that once I turned on the TV, I would be bombarded with images and stories that would only serve to deepen my anxiety. I forced myself to focus on the mundane, but the visions refused to leave me. They danced just behind my eyelids, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had upended my life. At work, the atmosphere was strangely heavy. My colleagues buzzed around, engaging in casual conversations, but I found it hard to concentrate. I tried to dive into my tasks, but every time I glanced at the screen, I saw the headlines, 20 years since the tragedy. Panic surged through me as I read the articles, detailing the lives lost and the families shattered. I felt suffocated by the weight of their stories, as if their grief was an anchor pulling me down into an abyss. "Hey Lucas, you okay?" My coworker, Sarah, asked, concern etched on her face. "Yeah, just tired," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Don't let it get to you. It's just another day," she said, patting my shoulder lightly. I nodded, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I needed air. I excused myself and stepped outside, the cool breeze hitting my face like a splash of cold water. But even in the open space, I could hear the whispers of the survivors in my mind. Their voices melded together, recounting their last moments, their regrets, their hopes, everything they had lost. It was a haunting symphony that I couldn't escape. I paced back and forth, trying to ground myself, but the memories clawed at me, relentless and unforgiving. After what felt like an eternity, I returned home, desperate for some form of distraction. As I rummaged through the clutter in my living room, my eyes landed on an old box tucked away in the corner. I had almost forgotten about it, my mother's belongings. Curiosity piqued. I opened the box and was met with a whirlwind of emotions. Inside, I found photographs, old trinkets, and letters. Each item was a fragment of a life that had once been vibrant and full. My fingers brushed against a small tape recorder, its plastic worn but still intact. Hesitating for a moment, I pressed play, and my mother's voice filled the room, soft and familiar. "Lucas, if you're listening to this, it means I'm no longer with you. I need you to know that there's a truth hidden beneath the surface of everything that happened." Her voice trailed off, and my heart raced. What truth? What had she discovered? I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been investigating something significant, something that tied directly to the accident. The words "hidden truth" echoed in my mind, urging me to dig deeper. I began to sift through the letters, my heart pounding as I read about meetings she had attended, discussions of a secret she had uncovered. "Lucas, I fear for our safety." One letter began. "There are things I've learned that could shake the very foundations of this company. I'm going to a meeting tonight. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll find out the truth." Who was she talking about? I needed answers. The more I read, the more questions I had. I was drawn to a particular letter that mentioned a meeting and a truth hidden away. It felt like a breadcrumb leading me into the dark, a path I was both eager and terrified to follow. The next day, I found myself at the local library, sifting through old newspapers. The dusty smell of paper filled my nostrils as I pored over articles detailing the crash and its aftermath. Hours passed, and with each page I turned, a clearer picture began to form. My mother had been on the verge of publishing something explosive, irregularities in the airline safety protocols. I could almost feel her passion radiating from the pages, her determination to seek justice for those who had suffered. I was lost in thought when a familiar face caught my eye in a grainy photograph. It was a woman with striking features that seemed to resonate deep within me. As I squinted at the image, recognition washed over me. This was Sophia, the woman who had appeared in my visions, always just out of reach, always tied to the tragedy. My heart raced, and I felt a surge of urgency. I needed to find her, to understand the connection between us. Days turned into a blur as I pieced together my mother's notes and the newspaper clippings. I spent every free moment at the library, delving into archives, searching for any clue that could lead me to Sophia. My heart ached with the weight of unresolved questions and the gnawing fear that time was running out. Finally, one afternoon, as I sat in a small cafe near the library, I spotted her. Sophia was sitting alone at a corner table, her gaze lost in thought. I hesitated for a moment, my nerves threatening to overwhelm me, but I knew I had to approach her. I took a deep breath and came to her table. "Excuse me, Sophia?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Yes? Do I know you? I'm Lucas. I believe we have something in common," I said, my heart pounding. "I've been researching the plane crash, and I think your sister was on that flight." Her expression shifted, curiosity mixing with caution. "You know about that? I've seen things, visions. I can't explain it, but I think they're connected to the accident." Sophia leaned forward, her interest piqued. "You're not the first to mention visions to me. I've experienced them too. They haunt me, especially since my sister died on that flight." The weight of her words hung in the air, and I could see the pain etched on her face. "I've been searching for answers for years. I thought I was alone in this." "We're not alone," I said, feeling a spark of hope. "I found some of my mother's old notes. She was investigating the airline. I think there's a bigger story here, something they don't want us to uncover." Sophia's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "There are references to irregularities, secrets that could change everything. We need to find out what really happened." As we continued talking, our exchange turned into a flurry of ideas and shared grief, a bond formed from our mutual desire for truth. We decided then and there to join forces, to dig deeper into the shadows that surrounded the crash. Together, we would confront the past, no matter how dark it might be. With a renewed sense of purpose, I felt a shift within me. The ghosts of my nightmares seemed to recede, replaced by a flicker of determination. The truth was out there, waiting for us to uncover it. And I knew that Sophia and I would stop at nothing to find it. I woke up gasping for air, my heart racing in my chest. The remnants of the nightmare lingered like an unwelcome fog, filled with the haunting screams of those lost in that dreadful airplane crash. I could still see the fiery remnants of the wreckage, the twisted metal silhouetted against a backdrop of despair. My body was drenched in sweat, and I felt an ache in my chest that was both familiar and terrifying. Sitting up in bed, I ran my hands through my hair, trying to shake off the remnants of the horror that clung to me. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand, 6:30 a.m. There was no use in trying to force myself back to sleep. I knew the visions would return, swirling around my mind like a relentless storm. I needed to distract myself, to push the memories of the crash aside. So I dragged myself out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. The smell of coffee brewing filled the air as I poured myself a cup, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The visions, the screams, were always just beneath the surface, waiting to pull me back into their depths. At work, I tried to focus on my tasks, but my mind refused to cooperate. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until I could escape the confines of my cubicle. It was then that I stumbled upon the news article online, the headline catching my breath in my throat. Anniversary of the tragic flight, remembering those lost. My heart dropped. A wave of panic crashed over me, and I felt my hands tremble as I clicked the link. The words blurred together as I read about the families left behind and the questions that still lingered about what had truly caused the crash. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking my chair over. My colleagues looked at me with concern, but I didn't care. I needed air. I needed to breathe. I dashed out of the office, the cold wind hitting my face as I stepped outside, but it did little to quell the rising tide of anxiety. The voices of the survivors echoed in my mind, their cries for help, their stories of loss. I leaned against a lamppost, trying to steady my racing heart. I felt like I was drowning in memories that weren't even mine, reliving the trauma of that fateful day. After what felt like an eternity, I returned home, hoping the solitude would provide some relief. As I walked through the door, something caught my eye, a dusty box sitting in the corner of the living room. It was filled with my mother's belongings, remnants of a life that felt both distant and painfully close. I hesitated, the weight of the box heavy with unspoken secrets. Curiosity gnawed at me, compelling me to sift through the contents. I opened the box carefully, revealing old photographs, letters, and mementos. My fingers brushed against a cracked cassette tape. I pulled it out, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. It was a recording of my mother's voice. I hesitated, the fear of what I might hear holding me back. But the need for answers pushed me forward. I grabbed a tape player and hit play. Her voice filled the room, soft and steady. "Lucas, if you're listening to this, it means I'm not there with you. I need you to know that I was working on something important. There's a truth buried beneath the surface of that tragedy, something that needs to be uncovered. Be careful, my love." The recording crackled, and I felt a chill run down my spine. My mother had been investigating something connected to the accident that had taken so much from us. I replayed the tape, desperate to catch every word, every hint she had left behind. A meeting, a truth hidden. You must find it. My heart raced. What had she discovered? What could she have meant? I felt a surge of determination. I needed to know what my mother was involved in, what she had risked her life to uncover. As the days passed, I dove back into the box, searching for clues. Among the letters, I found one that mentioned a secret meeting that my mother had been planning to attend. Intrigued, I decided to investigate further. I headed to the local library, hoping to find old newspapers that might shed light on the events surrounding the crash. Hours passed as I rifled through dusty archives, my fingers stained with ink and my mind racing with thoughts of my mother's hidden truths. Then, I stumbled upon an article that made my heart skip a beat. My mother had been on the verge of publishing a piece about irregularities within the airline involved in the crash. My breath caught in my throat. She had been close to exposing something significant. As I continued my research, I came across a photograph that made my blood run cold. A woman stood in the background of the image, her features strikingly familiar. My mind raced as I realized who she was. Sophia, the same woman who had haunted my visions, the one I had seen in fleeting glimpses whenever the nightmares struck. I felt an inexplicable connection tugging at me, and I knew I had to find her. Driven by urgency, I set out to locate Sophia. I wandered through the streets until I found a cozy cafe, its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. As I stepped inside, my heart raced. I scanned the room, searching for her face. And then I saw her, sitting alone at a table, her eyes lost in thought. I took a deep breath and approached her, my palms sweating with nerves. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Sophia?" She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Yes, that's me. And you are?" "I'm Lucas. I've been looking for you. I think we need to talk." Intrigued, she gestured for me to sit. "About what?" "It's about the accident, the plane crash. I've been having visions, and I believe they're connected to you and your sister." Her expression shifted, a mix of surprise and understanding. "My sister. She was on that flight. I've been trying to piece together what happened for years. You're not the first person to mention visions to me." I leaned in closer, urgency coloring my words. "I think our experiences are linked. There's something more to this tragedy, something my mother was uncovering before she passed." Sophia's gaze locked onto mine, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "What do you mean? Do you have information?" "I found letters and recordings. She was investigating the airline, trying to expose something. I believe there's a truth hidden beneath the surface, and we might be able to uncover it together." Sophia's expression softened as she absorbed my words. "I felt lost for so long. Every night, I see my sister's face in my dreams, calling out to me. I've been searching for answers, but I didn't know where to start." "We can start together," I said, determination flooding my veins. "Let's uncover what really happened." We exchanged information, our stories intertwining as we both sought the truth. It felt as though the pieces of a larger puzzle were beginning to fit together, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of purpose. "Let's meet again," Sophia suggested, her voice firm. "We need to dig deeper. There are too many unanswered questions." I nodded, the weight of our shared mission settling between us. "Absolutely. I won't stop until we find the answers." As we parted ways, I felt a mix of hope and trepidation. The visions that had plagued me now felt like a guiding force, pushing me toward the truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that our investigation would lead us down a dark path, but I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together, we would uncover the secrets that had haunted our pasts and finally give a voice to those who were lost. The sun had barely risen when I jolted awake, my heart racing as if I had just run a marathon. The remnants of a nightmare clung to me like a heavy fog, voices echoing in my mind, piercing screams and the haunting roar of an airplane engulfed in flames. I could still see the fiery wreckage in vivid detail, the twisted metal and the desperate faces of those trapped inside. I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, the chill of early morning air contrasting sharply with the heat of my panic. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to shake off the remnants of the terror that clung to me. After a few moments, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and planted my feet on the cold wooden floor. I needed to distract myself, to fill my mind with something other than the horrors of my dreams. Work, I thought. I could lose myself in the tasks ahead. It was a mundane routine that usually kept the demons at bay. As I made my way to the kitchen, the familiar sounds of the city waking up filtered through the window. The smell of coffee brewing calmed me slightly, and I poured myself a cup, letting the warmth seep into my hands. But as I scrolled through my phone to check emails, I stumbled upon something that made my stomach drop. A headline announcing the anniversary of the plane crash that had claimed so many lives. A tragedy that had forever altered my world. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave. I dropped the phone onto the counter, the screen lighting up with images of the wreckage, the very same I had seen in my dreams. It was as if the universe was conspiring to force me to confront my worst fears. I felt the walls closing in, and I knew I couldn't stay in this apartment any longer. I needed air, freedom from the suffocating weight of memories and terror. "Lucas, get it together," I muttered to myself, pushing through the door and stepping out into the bustling streets. The sun was shining, but I felt anything but bright. The voices of the survivors, those who had lived through the horror, echoed in my head, each one a reminder of loss, of pain. I walked aimlessly, seeking solace in the rhythmic beat of my feet against the pavement, but the cries never faded. They only grew louder. After what felt like hours of wandering, I returned home, exhausted and defeated. My mind was a tempest of thoughts and fears, and I knew I had to confront the past. I went to the attic, where I had stored away remnants of my childhood, things that had belonged to my mother. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but some instinct told me to dig deeper into her life, into the shadows of her past. Dust danced in the air as I opened a box filled with old clothes and forgotten memories. My fingers grazed over items until they landed on a small, weathered box. I opened it cautiously, revealing a trove of letters, photographs, and a small tape recorder. My heart raced as I picked up the recorder, realizing it contained my mother's voice, long silenced but now beckoning me to listen. Hesitating for a moment, I pressed play, the static crackling to life. "Lucas," her voice came through, soft yet filled with an urgency that sent chills down my spine. "If you're listening to this, it means I'm no longer here. There are things you need to understand about the accident, about what really happened." Her words faded into a murmur, but the intensity was palpable. I leaned closer, fear and curiosity intertwining within me. The recording detailed her investigation into the crash, her suspicions about the airline's negligence, and hints at a truth that had been buried. "There are powerful people involved," she warned, her tone grave. "I fear for my safety, but the truth must come out. You must promise me." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving me with a heavy weight of dread. What had she uncovered? Who had she been afraid of? My mind raced as I gathered the letters, each one filled with her meticulous notes about the crash, references to meetings and conversations that hinted at deeper conspiracies. Days passed in a blur as I immersed myself in my mother's writings. Each letter drew me further into a labyrinth of secrets. I learned about an upcoming meeting she had planned with a whistleblower who had evidence against the airline. The phrase "hidden truth" echoed in my mind, igniting a fire within me. My mother had been close to uncovering something monumental, and I felt an overwhelming need to continue her work. With newfound resolve, I decided to visit the local library. I had seen my mother poring over old newspapers and archives before, and I hoped to find something, anything, that could lead me to the truth. The scent of old paper hung in the air as I sifted through dusty volumes, searching for articles related to the crash. Hours slipped away as I dug deeper, losing myself in the past. Then I found it, a series of articles detailing the crash and the subsequent investigations. My heart raced as I read about the airline's repeated safety violations and the testimonies of survivors who had witnessed the negligence firsthand. But it was an article that caught my eye, a photograph tucked away in the corner of a page. A woman stood next to a wreckage, her face hauntingly familiar. My breath hitched as I recognized her. It was Sophia, the woman from my visions. "Who are you?" I whispered to the photo, feeling a strange connection to her. I had seen her in my dreams, yet here she was, tied to the very tragedy that haunted my waking hours. I needed to find her, to see if she had any answers about the visions that tormented me. Determined, I retraced my steps to the cafe where I had seen her once before. The clinking of cups and the murmur of conversations filled the air, but my focus was singular. My heart raced as I spotted her sitting in a corner, deep in thought. She was even more beautiful up close, with an air of melancholy that mirrored my own. Gathering my courage, I approached her table. "Excuse me, Sophia?" I said, my voice slightly trembling. She looked up, surprise flickering across her features. "Yes?" she replied, her brow slightly furrowing in curiosity. "I'm Lucas. I've been researching the plane crash, the one that your sister was on." As I spoke, I could see her expression shift, a mix of recognition and guardedness. "My sister," she whispered, her voice trailing off. "You know about it? I've been having these visions," I confessed, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I see the crash, the flames. I think it's connected to my mother's investigation." She was looking into the airline before. I hesitated, not wanting to say the words that felt like daggers, before she died. Sophia's eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears in her mind turning. "You're not alone," she said slowly. "I've been having visions too. I can't explain it, but they started after the crash. I've been searching for answers for years." A sense of relief washed over me, knowing that I wasn't facing this alone. "We need to work together," I urged. "Maybe we can uncover what really happened." Her gaze sharpened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You might be right. There are things I've learned, whispers of corruption surrounding the airline. If we join forces, we might stand a chance at finding the truth." The idea of unearthing the hidden narrative of that fateful day filled me with determination. Together, we could confront the shadows of our pasts and seek the justice that had eluded us for so long. The weight of our shared grief and the burden of our visions felt lighter as we forged an alliance, our fate intertwined in the quest for truth. I returned home, my mind still swirling with the remnants of the day's haunting revelations. The faint echoes of my mother's voice played in the back of my mind, a persistent reminder of the secrets I had barely begun to uncover. I felt an overwhelming urge to dig deeper into my family's past, to understand the tangled web of truth and deception that surrounded the tragedy of the flight my mother had been investigating. As I climbed the stairs to the attic, I was struck by the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that broke through the small window. The attic had always felt like a time capsule, a repository of forgotten memories and lost dreams. I had avoided this place for years, but today was different. Today I needed answers. I sifted through old boxes, each one filled with fragments of my childhood, relics of a simpler time before the accident had cast its shadow over our lives. Finally, in a corner, I spotted a worn box labeled "Mom." My heart raced as I knelt down to open it. Inside, I found a jumble of old photographs, letters, and mementos that told the story of a life once filled with hope and ambition. I pulled out a bundle of letters, their edges yellowed with age, and began to read. Each word felt like a breadcrumb leading me further down the rabbit hole. One letter caught my attention. It was dated just weeks before the accident. "I found something," it read, "something that could change everything. I need to meet with someone about it. There's a truth hidden beneath the surface, and I fear for my safety." The words sent a chill down my spine. What had she discovered? Who was she meeting? My mother had always been determined, a fierce journalist with a hunger for truth, but this sounded different. This sounded dangerous. I continued to rummage through the box until I stumbled upon a small, leather-bound diary. I opened it carefully, the pages crackling under my touch. My mother's handwriting was instantly recognizable. There's a parente involved. One entry read, but it was vague, lacking context. I furrowed my brow, trying to decipher who she could have meant. A distant relative? A family friend? The thought that someone within our own bloodline might be entangled in such a tragedy filled me with dread. "Lucas!" My father's voice broke through my thoughts, heavy with concern. I turned to see him standing at the foot of the stairs, his expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What are you doing up there?" "Just going through some old things," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I knew he was likely to question me further, but I wasn't ready to share the depth of my findings just yet. He climbed the stairs slowly, as if sensing the weight of the moment. "You know it's not healthy to dwell on the past," he said, his tone softening. "Your mother wouldn't want you to get caught up in all of this." "Maybe she wouldn't," I countered, my voice rising slightly. "But what if she was onto something? What if there's more to this story than we know?" I could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. "Some things are better left buried, Lucas," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand the dangers involved. There are people out there who don't want the truth to come out." "Is that what you're afraid of?" I pressed, feeling a surge of frustration. "That I'll uncover something that you've been hiding? That you've known all along?" His face hardened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something. Fear? Guilt? "You need to let it go. Trust me." I shook my head, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I can't just let it go. Not after everything that's happened. I need to know what happened to Mom, to the people on that flight. I can't let her investigation die with her." "Sometimes ignorance is a blessing," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, but I refused to back down. "You're hiding something. I can feel it. I won't stop until I find out what it is." With that, I turned away, my heart racing. I couldn't let my father's fear deter me. My mother had been brave, and if she had discovered something significant before her death, I owed it to her to continue her fight for the truth. As I headed back to the attic, I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. The idea that a family secret could be tied to the crash sent chills down my spine. What if someone I knew had played a role in this tragedy? What if the truth was more sinister than I could have ever imagined? The more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I had to confront my father again, to push for answers. But first, I needed to gather all the evidence I could find. With renewed vigor, I dove back into the box, rifling through the papers, desperate for anything that could lead me to the truth. Hours passed as I pored over every letter, every clipping, and every photograph. I discovered more mentions of meetings, more hints of cover-ups, and more references to a parente involved in the accident. Each revelation sent my mind reeling, connecting dots that I hadn't even known existed. Finally, I stumbled upon a photograph, one that seemed out of place among the other items. It showed a group of people standing together at what appeared to be a conference. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized one of the faces. It was Sophia, the woman from my visions, the one who felt inexplicably linked to my own story. "What are you doing here?" I muttered to myself, studying her image. The familiarity of her presence both comforted and unnerved me. I had to find her. If she was somehow tied to my mother's investigation, then together we might be able to unravel the truth. I took a deep breath and resolved to reach out to her. My heart raced at the thought of confronting these secrets, but I felt a new sense of purpose. The next day, I would visit the cafe where I'd spotted her before. I had to know what she knew and how deeply her life had been affected by that tragic flight. As I finally climbed into bed, exhaustion washed over me. I closed my eyes, but sleep eluded me. The shadows of the past loomed large, whispering secrets I was not yet ready to hear. But I couldn't ignore them any longer. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter in my search for truth, no matter where it led me. The night had been restless. I tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the images that invaded my dreams. The roaring engines, the screams of terrified passengers, and the flames that engulfed the aircraft. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, as I sat up and tried to shake off the remnants of the nightmare. I couldn't escape the feeling that the past was clawing its way back into my life, and it was relentless. After getting ready, I forced myself to go to work. I tried to concentrate on the usual tasks, but every time I glanced at my computer screen, the news headlines about the anniversary of the crash kept pulling me back. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out of the office, the murmurs of my coworkers fading behind me. Outside, the crisp air hit my face like a slap, grounding me momentarily. I took deep breaths, trying to clear my mind, but the voices of the survivors echoed in my ears. I could almost hear their pleas for help, their cries for justice. It was suffocating. I leaned against a nearby wall, feeling the rough surface press against my back, anchoring me to reality. I returned home, my mind still racing. As I stepped through the door, I was greeted by the familiar musty scent of my childhood home. It felt like a time capsule frozen in memories. My eyes caught sight of the old box in the corner of the living room, my mother's keepsake box. I hesitated for a moment, but an inexplicable pull urged me to investigate. Inside, I found trinkets that belonged to her. A faded photograph of her smiling, a beautiful locket that once held a picture of me as a child, and a stack of letters yellowed with age. My hands trembled as I sifted through the items, my fingers brushing against the worn paper. One letter caught my eye. Its contents spoke of a hidden truth and a secret meeting. My heart raced. What had she discovered? I dug deeper and unearthed an old cassette tape. It was dusty, but it held a promise of answers. I stared at it, hesitating. Should I listen? What if it revealed something I wasn't ready to face? But curiosity got the better of me. I found my old cassette player, plugged it in, and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, soft yet urgent. Lucas, if you're listening to this, it means I'm not around to protect you anymore. There are things you need to know about the accident, things that the world doesn't want you to find out. My heart sank. I leaned in closer, captivated by the revelation. I've been digging into the company's records, and I found inconsistencies. There were warnings about the plane before it took off, warnings they ignored. I believe there's a cover-up, and it goes deeper than we can imagine. There's a meeting next week with some people who might have answers. If something happens to me, promise me you'll continue this search. I was frozen, my breath caught in my throat. My mother had been onto something. She had known about the danger, and I was left with a puzzle that needed solving. The weight of the responsibility was heavy on my shoulders, but I couldn't back down now. I had to honor her memory. The next day, I returned to the box, determined to piece together her clues. I found more letters, each one filled with her thoughts and fears. She had written about a relative involved in the incident, but the details were vague. Who could it be? I needed to know more, so I decided to confront my father. Dad, I said that evening as we sat at the dinner table, the clinking of silverware fading into the background. Can we talk about Mom? He looked up, his expression guarded. What about her? I found some letters and a tape. She was investigating the accident, and there are things she mentioned that don't make sense. I held my breath, hoping he would open up. His gaze hardened, and he set down his fork. Lucas, your mother was a journalist. She often got caught up in things that were dangerous. It's better to let the past stay buried. But what if it's not just the past? What if there's something we need to know? Something that could help others? I pressed, my heart pounding. His silence was deafening. Some things are better left alone, son. You don't understand the risks involved. Risks or secrets? I shot back, frustration boiling over. Who is this relative she mentioned? What did she find out? Enough, he snapped, his voice rising. You're treading dangerous waters, Lucas. I won't let you get hurt like she did. His reaction only fueled my determination. I wanted answers, and I wasn't going to let fear dictate my actions. I spent the next few days buried in research, digging through every scrap of information I could find. I retraced my mother's steps, visiting the library and scouring old newspapers. I was sitting at a table, surrounded by stacks of dusty volumes, when I stumbled upon an article that caught my eye. It was an old piece about the crash, but it mentioned something else, irregularities within the airline. My heart raced as I read about whistleblowers coming forward and a string of mysterious disappearances linked to the company. Suddenly, a photo slipped from the pages and landed on the table. I picked it up, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of a woman, and she looked strikingly familiar. The resemblance was uncanny. She was the woman I had seen in my visions, the one who seemed to be tied to the crash. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to find her. I spent the next few days trying to track her down, fueled by a mix of desperation and hope. I finally learned that her name was Sophia, and she frequented a cafe downtown. The moment I walked into the cafe, I felt a strange pull, as if the universe was guiding me toward her. My heart raced as I scanned the room, and there she was, sitting alone at a table, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. I approached her, my palms sweaty and my mouth dry. "Excuse me, are you Sophia?" I asked, my voice shaky. She looked up, her blue eyes piercing through me. "Yes, that's me. Who are you?" "I'm Lucas. I've been having these visions about the crash, and I found your picture in an old article. I think we need to talk." Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Visions? About the crash? You're not the first to say that. I've had my own experiences." I sat down, my heart pounding. "You too?" "My mother was investigating the accident, and she mentioned you in her letters. She was looking for answers before she died." Sophia's gaze softened as she leaned closer. "My sister was on that flight. I've been searching for the truth ever since. I believe there's something hidden, something they don't want us to find." I felt a surge of connection between us, two lost souls drawn together by shared pain. "What have you discovered?" "Not much, but I know my sister wasn't the only victim. There were others, and they all had stories to tell. I've been trying to piece together the connections, but it feels like I'm being watched. It's dangerous." "I've had threats too," I admitted, my voice dropping to a whisper. "But we can't stop now. If we combine our information, maybe we can uncover the truth." She nodded, determination igniting in her eyes. "I've been waiting for someone who understands. Let's do this together." From that moment on, we became a team, united by our pain and our quest for justice. We shared our findings, piecing together the fragments of our families' lives, determined to expose the truth behind the tragedy that had haunted us both for far too long. As we left the cafe, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. No longer was I just a man plagued by nightmares. I was a seeker of truth, and I had found someone who shared my mission. Together, we would dive deeper into the shadows, unearthing the secrets that had been buried for too long. But little did we know, the danger was only beginning to close in around us. The dim lighting of the bar cast long shadows across the wooden tables, and the air was thick with the scent of stale beer and something I couldn't quite place. My heart raced as I glanced at Sophia, who was seated across from me, her fingers nervously tapping against the table. We had just escaped a close call, and now we were waiting for an informant who had promised us the information we desperately needed. My mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, each more troubling than the last. "Do you think he'll show up?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope so," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. This is our best shot at uncovering what really happened that day. The day had started off with a sense of urgency. After our encounter with the masked men, I realized just how dangerous our pursuit of the truth had become. The stakes had escalated, and I could feel the weight of the secret we were trying to reveal pressing down on me. I leaned back in my seat, attempting to shake off the tension that had settled in my shoulders. "Lucas, are you okay?" Sophia asked, concern etching her features. "You look pale." "Yeah, just thinking about everything," I admitted, rubbing my temples. "This whole thing is a lot to take in. I've seen things I can't explain, and now we're putting ourselves in danger for answers that may never come." Sophia nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight on the table. "I know it's scary, but we can't back down now. We're so close. If your mother was onto something, then we owe it to her to find out what it was." Her determination fueled my own, but the gnawing fear in my gut persisted. I glanced at the door again, half expecting the informant to burst in at any moment, but it remained closed. "Do you think he'll be safe?" I asked, suddenly aware of the implications of our actions. "What if those guys find him?" She shrugged, her expression hardened by resolve. "If he knows anything about what happened, he'll understand the risks, just like we do." The minutes dragged on, each second stretching into an eternity. I began to feel the oppressive silence of the bar closing in around us. I tapped my fingers on the table in a futile attempt to redirect my anxiety. Just then, the door creaked open and a figure stepped inside. My heart skipped a beat as I squinted through the dim lighting. The man was older, wearing a frayed leather jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He scanned the room, and when his eyes landed on us, he approached with a cautious gait. "Are you Lucas and Sophia?" he asked, his voice gruff and low. "Yeah, that's us," I replied, trying to mask my nervousness as I gestured for him to sit. "You're the informant?" "Yeah," he said, sliding into the booth across from us. "But we need to be quick. I don't know how long I have before someone notices I'm gone." Sophia leaned in, her eyes wide with anticipation. "What do you know about the flight? About the company?" The man glanced around, as if ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "I worked on the ground crew for that airline. I was there the day of the accident." My heart pounded in my chest as I exchanged a look with Sophia. "What did you see?" Pressed, my voice low. He hesitated, his gaze darting to the side. "Look, I didn't have all the details at the time, but I remember there being a lot of unusual activity leading up to that flight. There were reports about faulty equipment that never made it to the maintenance logs." "Faulty equipment?" Sophia echoed, incredulous. "Why wouldn't they address that?" "Money," he replied, his voice dripping with disdain. "They were cutting corners to save costs. I heard whispers that the higher-ups were pushing to keep flights running no matter what. They didn't want to lose money, so they ignored the problems." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So they knew? They knew there were issues and still put people on that plane." He nodded solemnly. "Exactly. And the night before the flight, I saw some engineers working on it. They were scrambling to fix things, but I could tell they were just putting on a show. They didn't want anyone to know the real state of the aircraft." Sophia leaned forward, her voice urgent. "What else? Did you hear anything about my sister?" He hesitated again, his brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, I don't know, but I wish I could help you. The truth is, I didn't know what was really going on until it was too late." I felt the weight of his words settle heavily in the air between us. "What happened after the crash?" I asked, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. "After the crash, the company did everything it could to hide the truth. They paid off a lot of people, including some of the crew. I was scared, too. I saw what they were capable of, and I didn't want to end up like those poor souls. I kept my head down and tried to forget. My heart sank. But you're here now. Why take the risk to meet us?" "Because I can't let them get away with it," he replied, his voice rising with intensity. "People deserve to know what really happened. Your mother was onto something, and I think she might have been getting close to the truth. That's why I'm here." Just as he finished speaking, I noticed a group of men in dark suits enter the bar. They scanned the room, their eyes landing on our booth. My gut twisted in fear. "Shit!" I muttered under my breath. "We need to go. Now." The informant looked alarmed, his eyes widening. "What? Why?" "They're here," I said, nodding toward the men. "We can't stay." Sophia was already sliding out of the booth, her face pale. "Let's go through the back." We scrambled to our feet, and I felt a surge of adrenaline propelling me forward. The informant hesitated, glancing back at the men who were now making their way toward us. "Come on," I urged, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the back exit. We dashed through the bar, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind us as we pushed through the door marked "Employees Only." The narrow hallway was dimly lit, and I could hear the pounding of my heart in my ears. As we reached the back door, I glanced over my shoulder. The men were following us, their expressions cold and determined. "Hurry!" I shouted, throwing open the door and leading us outside. The night air hit us like a wave, but there was no time to breathe. We sprinted down the alley, the sounds of footsteps echoing behind us. I could feel the fear coursing through me, but I pushed it aside. "This way!" I yelled, veering left and heading toward a nearby street. My mind raced as I searched for a safe spot to hide. "Where do we go?" Sophia panted, glancing back, her face etched with fear. "There's a parking garage up ahead. We can hide there," I replied, urgency fueling my movements. Just as we reached the entrance of the garage, I heard a shout behind us. "Stop! You can't run from us!" My heart raced as I pushed through the door, ushering Sophia and the informant in before slamming it shut. I led them deeper into the shadows, praying that we could evade our pursuers. We ducked behind a row of parked cars, silence enveloping us as we tried to catch our breath. My heart thudded loudly in my chest, and I could hear Sophia's quickened breaths beside me. "What now?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We wait," I replied, my throat dry. "We have to make sure they don't find us. If they know we're here, we're done for." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as we huddled in the dark, listening to the distant sounds of the city and the faint echoes of footsteps above us. My thoughts raced, circling back to the informant's revelations. They knew. They had to know that we were onto something, and if we didn't act quickly, we might lose our chance to expose the truth. "Lucas," Sophia said softly, breaking the silence, "do you think they're going to come down here?" "I don't know," I whispered back, straining to hear any signs of our pursuers. "But we can't let them find us. We need to figure out our next move." The informant shifted uneasily beside us. "I shouldn't have come here. They'll find me if they realize I'm missing." "No," I said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. We need your help to go public with what you know. We can't let this be swept under the rug." He nodded slowly, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "I just don't want to end up like those other people. I've seen what they do to anyone who gets in their way." "Then you have to trust us," I urged. "If we work together, we can expose this. We can make sure those responsible are held accountable." Sophia reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure." I stared at the clock, my heart racing as the time for our meeting approached. Sophia and I had spent the last few days gathering every piece of information we could find, and now we were about to confront a member of the airline's board of directors, an individual who had the power to either confirm our worst fears or bury them deeper than we could imagine. I could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air, thick with anticipation and dread. "Are you ready for this?" Sophia asked, breaking the tense silence in the cramped car. Her voice was steady, but I could see the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. It mirrored my own feelings. This was it. This was the moment we had been building toward. "I don't know if anyone can be ready for this," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I adjusted the collar of my shirt for the umpteenth time, feeling the fabric constricting around my throat. "But we have to do it. We have to know the truth." Sophia nodded, her expression resolute. "Just remember, we have the evidence. If he tries to dodge our questions, we won't let him. We deserve answers, Lucas. We deserve justice for the people we lost." As we arrived at the sleek glass building that housed the airline's corporate offices, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The lobby was pristine, the air filled with a faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. It felt sterile, almost surreal, as if we were stepping into a world that was entirely disconnected from the tragedy that had brought us here. We approached the receptionist, who looked up from her computer with an impassive expression. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting that she had little patience for anything outside of her routine. "We have a meeting with Mr. Caldwell," I said, trying to sound confident. "Lucas Mitchell and Sophia Almeida." She glanced at her computer screen and then back at us. "Have a seat. I'll let him know you're here." We took a seat in the waiting area, the silence pressing down on us. I glanced at Sophia, who was tapping her fingers nervously against her knee. What if he refuses to talk? What if he just brushes us off like everyone else? "He won't have a choice," she said, her voice firmer now. "We have the evidence. We know what happened, and we're not going to let him silence us." Minutes felt like hours as we waited, but finally, the receptionist gestured for us to follow her. I took a deep breath and stood up, my stomach churning with a mix of excitement and fear. We walked down a long corridor, the walls lined with abstract art that felt cold and unwelcoming. The receptionist knocked on a door and opened it, gesturing for us to enter. Mr. Caldwell will see you now, she said before stepping back, allowing us to step inside. The office was luxurious, with dark wood furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. Seated behind a large desk was a man in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back and his expression unreadable. He looked up as we entered, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Almeida," he said, his voice smooth but lacking warmth. "I hope you understand that my time is valuable. Thank you for meeting with us," I said, trying to project confidence. "We have some important questions about the accident." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I'm afraid there's been a lot of misinformation surrounding that incident. It was a tragic accident. We've done everything we can to ensure the safety of our flights since then." "Tragic accident?" I echoed, my voice rising slightly. "People died because of negligence. My mother was investigating this before she died, and we have evidence that suggests you were aware of issues with the aircraft before the flight." Mr. Caldwell's expression shifted, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "You're mistaken. The investigation into the accident was thorough, and we cooperated fully with the authorities." Sophia stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Your company was aware of mechanical failures, yet you continued to operate the aircraft. This isn't just misinformation. It's a cover-up. We have letters from my mother that indicate you were involved in a conspiracy to hide the truth." For a moment, Caldwell remained silent, his gaze piercing as if he were weighing our words. "I can assure you, Ms. Almeida, that your mother was mistaken. We take safety seriously. If she had any concerns, she should have brought them to us directly. Your direct reports were silenced." I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "We've spoken to former employees who were threatened when they tried to speak out. You can't deny that." Caldwell leaned forward, his demeanor shifting slightly, the tension in the room palpable. "I understand your desire for answers, but you must consider the consequences of what you're pursuing. There are forces at play here that you do not fully comprehend." "Are you threatening us?" Sophia demanded, her voice steady despite the tension. "No, of course not. I'm merely advising you to tread carefully. The truth can be a dangerous thing, particularly when it disrupts the lives of many." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what he was implying. "So you're saying we should just forget about this? That we should let people suffer in silence?" Caldwell's expression hardened. "I'm saying that pursuing this path could lead to harm, not just for you, but for those you care about. Sometimes, ignorance is a blessing." I exchanged a glance with Sophia, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. "You can't expect us to walk away after what we've uncovered. We have a responsibility to the victims and their families," I said defiantly. "Responsibility?" Caldwell scoffed. "What you're doing is reckless. You're playing a dangerous game, and you don't even realize it." Just then, his phone rang, cutting through the tension in the room. Caldwell glanced at the screen and his expression shifted to one of annoyance. "Excuse me," he said, raising a finger as he answered the call. "Yes? What is it?" His tone was clipped, and I could sense a growing agitation in his voice. I turned to Sophia, whispering, "We need to push harder. We can't let him intimidate us." She nodded, determination in her eyes. As Caldwell spoke on the phone, I leaned forward, my heart racing. "Mr. Caldwell, you need to understand that we won't back down. We have evidence that could expose everything you've been hiding." Caldwell held up a hand, silencing me as he continued his conversation. "I understand, but I need more time." "No, I'm not. Fine. I'll handle it." He hung up abruptly, his gaze shifting back to us, irritation etched on his face. "I'm afraid we've reached an impasse. I suggest you drop this before it escalates further." "Why are you so desperate to intimidate us?" Pressed, my voice rising again. "What are you hiding?" He stood up abruptly, the air in the room thick with tension. "I'm not hiding anything. You're simply too blinded by your vendetta to see the bigger picture. You think you're fighting for justice, but you're only stirring a hornet's nest. There are people who would do anything to protect their interests, even if it means silencing you. I felt a rush of anger. You think we're afraid of a few threats? We're not backing down. We're going to get to the truth, whether you like it or not. Caldwell's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something. Fear, maybe? Before he masked it with a veneer of calm. I can't help you if you're unwilling to listen. Consider your next steps carefully. As he turned to look out the window, the city sprawled beneath us. I could feel the urgency pulsing through my veins. We had come too far to turn back now. I exchanged another glance with Sophia, who seemed just as resolute. "Thank you for your time," I said, my voice steady as I stood up. "But we will not stop until we find the truth." Caldwell turned back to us, a smirk almost forming on his lips. "Very well. Just remember, you were warned." As we left his office, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me. I had expected him to be evasive, but the weight of his words hung heavily in the air. "What now?" Sophia asked, her brow furrowed in thought as we stepped back into the sterile lobby. "We keep digging," I said, determination flooding my voice. "If he thinks he can intimidate us into silence, he's wrong. We have to find more evidence, talk to more people." Sophia nodded, her eyes alight with purpose. "We'll find a way to expose the truth, together." And with that, we stepped back into the world outside, ready to face whatever came next. The day of the press conference arrived with a heavy cloud hanging over me. I could feel the weight of anticipation and dread in my chest as I glanced at the clock on the wall. Minutes felt like hours as I paced back and forth in my small apartment, the walls closing in around me. The truth we had uncovered was powerful, but my mind was clouded with doubt. What if we were wrong? What if no one believed us? I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the dampness of sweat on my palms. The phone rang, breaking the silence. I hesitated, eyeing the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize. I picked up, my heart racing. "Lucas!" A voice hissed through the line, low and threatening. "You're making a mistake. You need to stop this. You have no idea what you're getting into." "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want? You'll regret this. You have no idea who you're up against. Just walk away while you still can." The line went dead, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. My hands trembled as I dropped the phone on the table. Sophia arrived shortly after, her presence a welcome distraction. She stepped into my apartment, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, a hint of concern in her voice. "I just got a threatening call," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "They said we need to stop." Sophia's expression hardened. "That's exactly why we need to go through with this. They're scared of what we found. We can't let them intimidate us." I nodded, though a part of me was still terrified. "You're right. We can't back down now." We gathered our materials, the evidence we had painstakingly collected over the past weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom as we made our way to the small conference room we had booked. The air was thick with tension, and the low hum of voices echoed in the hallway. As we entered the room, the sight of the empty chairs waiting for the audience made my heart race. A small podium stood at the front, adorned with a simple sign declaring our press conference. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Are you ready?" Sophia asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a smile. Minutes later, the room began to fill with journalists, photographers, and curious onlookers. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. I could see the glint of cameras, the scribbling of pens, and the eager expressions of those who sought the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice echoing in the room, "thank you for being here today. We stand before you to reveal the truth about the tragic accident that took so many lives and to expose the cover-up that has persisted for far too long." Sophia stepped forward, her voice firm. "We have uncovered evidence that the airline was aware of serious mechanical issues with the aircraft prior to the flight. Our investigation revealed that the company chose profit over safety, and as a result, lives were lost. A murmur rippled through the audience as I continued. We have documents, testimonies, and even threats aimed at those who sought to speak out about this. This isn't just a story. It's a matter of justice for the victims and their families. Questions began to fly from the crowd, and I braced myself for the onslaught. How do you know the company knew about the issues? One reporter asked, her pen poised to catch every word. We have access to internal communications, emails that indicate awareness of the mechanical failures, I replied, my heart pounding. We also have witness statements from former employees who were silenced. Sophia added, and we're not alone in this. Families of the victims have come forward, sharing their stories, their pain. They deserve to know what truly happened. The atmosphere shifted, the tension in the room palpable. Just as I was about to address another question, a loud bang echoed from the back of the room, making everyone jump. I turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, tall with a stern expression, dressed in a dark suit. An air of authority surrounded him, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Excuse me, can I help you? I asked, my voice steady despite the unease creeping in. Lucas, he said, his voice cold and condescending. This isn't the place for your little charade. You're playing with fire. Sophia stepped forward, her expression defiant. We're not afraid of you. This is about justice. The man smirked, his eyes narrow. Justice? Or a witch hunt? You're not equipped to handle the truth you're digging for. Who are you? I demanded, trying to stand my ground. I'm someone who can make your life very complicated if you don't stop this, he replied, his gaze unwavering. You'll regret it. Is that a threat? Sophia shot back, her voice challenging. Consider it a warning, he said before turning on his heel and walking out, leaving behind an oppressive silence. I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, a dark cloud looming over us. Who was that guy? A reporter asked, confusion evident on their face. Just another attempt to intimidate us, I said, trying to project confidence. But we won't back down. The press conference continued, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The audience seemed more engaged, their expressions shifting from skepticism to intrigue. As I shared more details about the evidence we had found, I noticed a flicker of movement outside the window. A dark car parked across the street, its occupants hidden behind tinted glass, watching us. My heart raced as I tried to maintain my composure. Sophia caught my eye and nodded slightly, as if sensing my apprehension. We needed to stay focused. Lucas, a voice called from the back of the room, pulling me back to the present. What do you hope to achieve with this press conference? I took a deep breath, looking directly into the camera. Our goal is to hold those responsible accountable. We want to ensure that such negligence never happens again. The families deserve answers, and we will fight for them. More questions followed, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I shared our findings. The energy in the room shifted, the audience becoming more animated, leaning in closer. But just as I was about to reveal the most damning piece of evidence, a document that could change everything, the lights flickered. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as darkness enveloped the room. What's happening? I heard someone shout. Panic began to set in as people fumbled for their phones, the glow illuminating the chaos. I strained to see through the shadows, confusion swirling around us. Sophia, I called, trying to find her in the chaos. Where are you? Lucas, she shouted back, her voice barely audible over the rising panic. Stay close. And just like that, the lights flickered back on. I squinted against the sudden brightness, my heart racing as I scanned the room. But something was off. People were moving, faces were twisted in fear, and it felt as though something had shifted in the very fabric of reality. I took a step forward, but as I did, the room began to spin. The voices around me blurred, morphing into an indistinguishable cacophony. I felt dizzy, as if the ground beneath me had been pulled away, and suddenly I was falling into darkness. Lucas, I heard Sophia's voice, reaching out for me, but it felt distant, like a fading echo, and then everything went black. I stood behind the podium, my heart racing and my palms sweating as the crowd buzzed with anticipation. This was it, the moment I had been working toward, the culmination of all my research, the truth that needed to be revealed. Sophia stood beside me, her expression a mix of determination and anxiety. We had pieced together the fragments of a long-buried tragedy, and now we were ready to expose the secrets that had haunted us both. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice shaking slightly. Thank you for being here today. We have gathered to discuss the truth behind the tragic plane crash that took so many lives and shattered countless others. I could see the eyes of the audience fixed on me, some filled with sympathy, others with skepticism. I took a deep breath and glanced at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. She had been my rock through this tumultuous journey, and I knew I could count on her support. I want to start by talking about my mother, I continued, my voice gaining strength. She was a journalist who dedicated her life to uncovering the truth. Before her untimely death, she was investigating the very company responsible for the crash. The company that knew about the mechanical failures but chose to ignore them. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could feel the tension building. I pressed on, fueled by the urgency of the moment. We've uncovered documents that show they were aware of severe issues with the aircraft. Instead of grounding it, they prioritized profits over safety. This is not just negligence. It's a blatant disregard for human life. I noticed a few people nodding, their expressions shifting from disbelief to concern. But just as I was gaining momentum, an unexpected wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled, gripping the edge of the podium for support. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. Lucas. Sophia's voice sounded distant, as if she were speaking from underwater. The lights above flickered, and shadows danced along the walls of the room. Panic surged within me as I struggled to focus. Suddenly, everything went dark. A cold sweat broke out over my body, and I felt myself falling into an abyss. There were no sounds, no sensations, only an overwhelming silence. Then, as if I were being pulled from a dream, I gasped for air and opened my eyes. I was no longer in the conference room. Instead, I found myself in a vast, empty space, the air thick with an oppressive weight. Shadows lurked around me, swirling and shifting, their forms indistinguishable. I could feel their presence, an invisible force surrounding me, heavy and suffocating. Where am I? I whispered, my voice trembling. My heart raced as I realized I was alone, cut off from everything and everyone I had ever known. Sophia, I called out, desperation creeping into my tone. There was no response, only the echo of my own voice fading away. I looked around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I stepped forward, but the ground felt unstable beneath my feet, as if I were walking on the edge of a precipice. Is this some sort of twisted joke? I shouted into the void. I'm not afraid of you. I know the truth. The words felt hollow against the silence that enveloped me, but the shadows didn't respond. They continued to swirl around me, twisting and coiling like smoke. I felt a chill run down my spine as memories began to flood my mind. Visions of the crash, the flames engulfing the aircraft, the terrified faces of the passengers. I staggered back, clutching my head as the images became more vivid, more unbearable. Stop! I cried out, collapsing to my knees. I don't want to see this anymore. Please. The shadows closed in, their whispers growing louder, a cacophony of anguished voices. I could hear the cries of those who had perished, their pain seeping into my very soul. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it was no use. The memories crashed over me like waves, pulling me under. You can't do this to me, I screamed, feeling the weight of their grief pressing down on me. I'm trying to help you. A figure emerged from the shadows, its features obscured but its presence unmistakably familiar. Lucas. The figure spoke, its voice hauntingly soft. You cannot escape the truth. You're bound to it, just as we are. Who are you? I stammered, fear pooling in my stomach. "What do you want from me?" The figure stepped closer, and I could finally make out its face. It was a woman, one I recognized from my visions. "I am Sophia's sister," she said, her expression a mix of sorrow and longing. "I was on that flight. I was taken before my time, just like so many others." "No," I gasped, my heart breaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen. We were trying to find the truth for you, for everyone." "Truth?" she echoed, her voice filled with anguish. "What good is the truth if it remains hidden in the shadows? You must understand, Lucas, the truth is a double-edged sword. I don't care about the consequences," I shouted, frustration boiling over. "I lost everything because of this. My mother died trying to uncover the truth, and now I want to honor her memory." The figure shook her head. "You seek justice, but in doing so, you may bring more pain than healing. The truth you uncover will not bring back the lives that were lost." Her words struck me like a physical blow, and I fell silent, the weight of her sorrow hanging in the air. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I need to know how to help you. How can I free you from this torment?" "By accepting the darkness as part of your journey," she replied, her voice fading into a whisper. "You cannot change the past, but you can choose how to honor it. You must carry our stories with you and share them with the world." I shook my head, feeling hopeless. "But I don't know if I can face it. The fear, the pain, it's all too much." "You are stronger than you think," she said, her voice now a soft breeze around me. "You've already begun the journey. Trust in your strength, and know that we are with you." As her figure began to dissolve into the shadows, I felt a surge of determination. "I won't let your stories be forgotten," I vowed, feeling a flicker of hope ignite in my chest. "I will fight for the truth, no matter the cost." The shadows swirled around me, and I closed my eyes, feeling the weight lift as the darkness receded. When I opened them again, I was back in the conference room, the podium steady beneath my hands. The audience stared at me, their expressions a mixture of concern and confusion. "Lucas!" Sophia rushed to my side, her eyes wide with worry. "What happened? You just collapsed." I'm okay," I stammered, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "I saw her, Sophia. I saw your sister. She told me. She told me to honor their stories." Sophia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You found a way to connect with them." The audience was silent, their attention fully on us. I straightened, feeling a renewed sense of purpose swelling within me. "I won't back down," I declared, my voice steady. "I will share the truth, no matter what it takes. For the victims, for the families, for everyone who deserves to know what really happened." As I looked out at the crowd, I could see the flicker of understanding spreading among them. The shadows that had haunted me began to dissipate, replaced by the light of hope and determination. And in that moment, I knew the fight was far from over, but I was no longer alone. I had found my voice, and I would use it to shine a light on the darkness, to uncover the truth, and to honor those who had been lost. Together with Sophia, we would carry their stories forward, ensuring they would never be forgotten.